855, an agreement with Parks about the 2868 Fairfax Street. Yes, I agree with you. It is hard to hear. Do talk right into your microphones, that me included, I suppose. And thank you. I appreciate it. This fan over here makes it difficult for us down here to understand. Hi. Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Gilmore. Would you like to introduce everybody, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Hello, all council members. Thank you for being here. We are here to present about the 29th and Fairfax Park proposal. I'm Scott Gilmore. I'm Deputy Executive Director of Parks and Planning. We have
Lisa Lumney. I'm with the Division of Real Estate.
Gordon Robertson, Director of Park Planning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Take it away.
So we'll jump in.
And we want to say happy birthday as well.
Oh. Thank you very much.
So we are here to present about the 29th and Fairfax Park. And we actually have some historical information about this. This is located on 29th and Fairfax, the block of 29th and Fairfax. This is an old Excel transfer station. Back in 2015, I reached out to Excel. There was 2 transfer stations in the city being decommissioned, one in Westwood neighborhood and then this one in Park Hill. And I reached out to them and reached out to them about the possibility of acquiring these properties for possible pocket parks. Gordon and I, when I first started this job, me and Gordon actually took a trip to LA and we visited some parks in LA. And some of the parks that we visited were pocket parks. They actually started a whole program on developing pocket parks in communities where they weren't going to be able to build large parks, but be able to build some pocket parks that really could serve the community. So this effort kind of came out of that trip, especially when, as our city is densifying, we actually need to find these types of opportunities to try to create some open space in neighborhoods that desperately need them. Yeah. We actually purchased the 2 properties for a total of $50,000. So each property is about 1/3 of an acre, so not very large, but large enough to have a nice little pocket park. And so at the time we purchased those, we did get funding from BMO, the Budget Management Office, and there was no funding identified at that time to actually build any park amenities. So right now at this time we have just held onto those spaces. So.
However, in 2016, H&M Capital, otherwise known as PHC Mixed Use LLC, approached DPR with an offer to swap their property across the street. That offer was an equal site, 0.36 acres, almost directly across the street. As we evaluated that offer, we looked at the benefits of the adjacencies of his new development that would, with retail, with restaurants, with those kinds of local neighborhood activities. We thought that was a positive part of his offer. We also felt that his offer of immediate funding to start the design and construction process, because we did not have identified funds at that time and still do not, so that the funding and the immediate adjacencies of the retail on the first floor seemed like that made that a good offer to consider. Going forward now, it's almost 3 years later. We have
a little louder, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. We do have a terms of contract to run through with you. DPR, through this contract, is to receive a cash donation of $650,000 from the developer. $100,000 will be immediately available in escrow for design process, and the remaining $550,000 will be for future construction, and I'll talk about that later. DPR will also be responsible for design and construction operation and maintenance of the park. This will be a DPR park. DPR will begin construction in fall of 2019, assuming that the residential development is complete. We will then be ready to hopefully begin construction in the fall of 2019. We do lease back this site back to the developer during construction for staging purposes for that period up until the October of 2019. And then lastly, when the park is established, it will be designated as a park through a formal city council vote.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then a quick little bit about what we've done to date on the community design process. Completed to date, we've held 4 public meetings. We've conducted an online survey, so we've had many hundreds of folks from that neighborhood weigh in on what they want to see in the in this park. Our next steps are to begin process to rezone the property to OSA. Our additional next steps are to work with the community to hire a design firm. So we want the hiring of the design firm to be in conjunction with the community. We want them to be at the table in the design process, all the way through the design process, which we anticipate to be from fall of 18 through summer of 2019. And then we hope to start that kickoff with a community charrette, probably on a Saturday, maybe 4 hours, where we can sit down with the community and really listen and hear, how we can get off on the right foot on the design of this park for their neighborhood. On the construction side of things, the approximate cost for a park of this type is typically in the $40 to $50 per square foot. That should be covered by the donation. However, the design is yet to be done, so that design might exceed that cost. It's possible. And if costs exceed that, DPR would be responsible for any additional costs. We do sometimes phase construction, so if there was an expensive feature that exceeded our costs and we couldn't find that additional funding, we could always design that so we could build it later if needed, but we don't anticipate having to do that. Our project procurement would be fall of 2018 through the spring of 2019. That's just getting a contractor on board, and then construction in 2019 through the spring of 2021. And that is an advanced schedule in the city parks construction business. So with that, I just wanted to maybe turn it back to Scott.
Yes, I did want to mention something else too. In December of 2017, Greater Park Hill community actually did have some community meetings, and they engaged the neighborhood through their R&O. And they did have 3 more additional community meetings where they took a lot of input in and got some really good input on design and concepts. They did send this to everybody. They sent this to the city council, and they sent it to us. There are some really good concepts in this that along with the concepts and ideas that we've gotten with other community members, I believe we have a really, really good foundation to build a really, really amazing park for this community. So I did want to make sure we highlighted that we do have this information, and we will be utilizing it as at the start of our design process.
Okay. Is that the end of your presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilman Herndon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hey, thank you all for this. We've been dealing with this since 2016, and I appreciate the community's efforts in that. A lot of the community members are here, so I want to thank them for being here. I met with them at the end of June, and there were a bunch of questions that they sent to me that I forwarded to you that you all posted on your FAQ page, so I appreciate that. I just want to highlight a couple of them because there are some people that came to public comment, and they had a couple of remarks about this. And you touched base on it. Okay,
Just a little bit louder.
Okay, a little bit louder. So sorry if I'm too loud. So one of the things is about the community involvement, and you touched base on it, but just reemphasize this because there are some members of the community that believe that they have not been or are not going to be a part of this park design. So just once again, if you could reiterate, will the community have a seat at the table, a voice when it comes to designing this park?
This will be a totally engaging community process to make sure everybody's voice is heard. We will do everything we can to get out into the community and make sure that we have meetings throughout the community. At Greater Park Hill, we'll have them at schools. We'll have them where we need to have them to make sure everybody gets included. We'll do some stuff online, but we know that all residents don't have access to email or online services. So we'll make sure we do everything we can to get out there and engage the community as best as possible.
Thank you. And I received an email from a constituent that had the premise that if the park goes to the east side, it will be limited just to residents of that development. So could you please speak to that, this being a public park?
So once this park is built, well, actually once it's transferred, this becomes a Denver park. We'll go through the process of designating it, and you guys have been involved with me designating over 1,000 acres of parkland in this city, so that's a process we all are pretty familiar with. It will become a designated park, which means that that park will be protected in perpetuity, and the only way to do something non-park related on that space is by a vote of the public. So that is definitely going to be in place. We also, that space will be maintained by park rules and regulations. Park rangers will patrol it. Park maintenance staff will take care of it. It will be permitted. However, we determine what the permitting for this area is, because it is a small space. So it's not like we can just permit different sections of it. This permitting will have to be determined. But permitting will be through the Denver Parks and Recreation Permitting Office.
Thank you. And my last question, the current location, no matter which side of this Fairfax that the park will go on, it will be surrounded by commercial, whether it be on the west or east side. However, we were approached by the owner of the beer garden on the west side who had a proposal that we did not seem viable. I wanted to know if you could just take an opportunity to speak a little bit why Parks and Rec did not believe that that was a viable option.
The real estate actually received that proposal. They got a letter back in November of 2017. At that time, we had already been in discussions with H&M Capital. They've changed their name, but H&M Capital. We've been in discussion with them for a year, and so we had gotten way down a path of working with them, and they had committed a certain amount of money to this project. We received that proposal at the end of November. The first proposal was that they would buy the parcel from us for $150,000. They would build a private park, and then they would actually allow some use by the community and the city. For us, that was just not even, that wasn't a non-starter immediately. The second proposal was they would pay for improvements to land to build the park, and that's basically the second proposal they would help pay. And so we had a solid proposal from a developer that was moving forward, that had already purchased the whole east side of the block, had committed a certain amount to us, and had committed to the community that he wanted to build a park. So that's why we had moved forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Councilman. Councilman Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, Scott, what was, when we acquired this and the Westwood substation from Excel, $50,000 seems way below market. What are the provisions in the franchise agreement that affected this? Or maybe Lisa, you could answer this. But I understand that we have a right of first refusal when, under the franchise agreement, when Excel disposes of property, but $50,000?
Correct.
For
Well,
both?
I think
Wow.
when they assessed it, and that was based on Excel's market values of how we looked at it, any easements that impact it, or potential for larger developments around it. In this instance, and at that time, because these conversations actually started before we closed, you know, the markets were coming back and rebounding, but they weren't at full market values at that time that we're seeing today.
Okay, so that $25,000 for each parcel
Approximately,
was deemed to be by Excel was the fair market value
Correct.
in their eyes. Wow. Okay. And what is this? Did we follow a process, an established city process for disposal of city land in this case? I mean, did we seek other bids? Did we look for other opportunities? Are we selling to the highest? You know, is this the highest and best proposal? Because I understand this is different. This is a swap. But if this were an outright sale, we'd be following a different process, would we not?
Correct.
That's a Lisa
Yes,
question.
if it were just a straight disposition, we would be following a different process. But because it is an exchange of something that was deemed to be park, it may not be dedicated, but park
Right.
designated land, that is why we have not gone through our traditional disposition process.
Okay, and what's the procedure then that you follow in real estate when there's a proposed swap?
The swap, it's not as structured as our true disposition. We will still look internally to make sure that we have some of the clearance and releases signed off, so we are aware of easements, things like that other agencies would have an interest in or need to be aware of. And then make sure certainly we're circling back with council offices, things of that nature.
Okay. And Scott, maybe as briefly as you can, perhaps, we've all heard from a lot of folks in the community over the last few months. On each side, I went out and toured the property, and I'm trying to understand effectively, in your view, what is the difference, if any, between having the park on the east side or the west side? And understanding that we're not really talking only about a park in this instance, we're talking about a lot of the broader issues in Denver, like gentrification.
Yes.
So what are the effective differences having this on the east side versus the west side?
So some of the differences would be, of course, we have somebody that is willing to put forth some funding to get this built. That was one of the big criteria. I mean, it was important.
And
But
and is that enough funding to do this park, in your opinion?
we think hopefully it could be very close, but if, like Gordon said, if there's any, it depends on the design. When we come together with the community, say they want a spray pad, that actually would be a higher cost amenity, so we would actually have to build that into the cost.
Okay.
Some of the things is, I've always, when I went to these meetings, in 2015, I started going to Creighton Park Hill, and I stressed to them that I was working with Excel to acquire these parcels. The first thing I said is I did not want to actually acquire a piece of property and then just grass a property in this community and just make it an area that could become a detriment to the community, where negative behavior could happen. So a big piece of that was to try to make sure we had eyes on the park. And so when the developer came along and he was like, we'd like to put some restaurants on there that face the park, that was a great concept for us to be able to say, hey, as a family, if you have family or if you just want to go out and have a bite to eat, you go out to this restaurant and you can sit on the edge of a park and look out on a park and see kids playing and having a good time. That is what we wanted. We wanted an active space that you could be playing in, but also people on the edges that were looking into this space.
Okay, now you could have that on the west side as well. Because
We don't know that, though,
Okay.
because there's no plan at this time for the west side. So this was actually something we could move forward with, that had funding, that we actually had a real plan and a design for. So the west side, there's still no design for those spaces yet. And so the only thing that's there on the west side is the existing development. You have the building that's the fitness club, and then you have the beer garden.
And that's the property to the south, the fitness, yoga or something or other?
Yes.
CrossFit? Okay. Obviously, I don't understand any of those. Okay. But I appreciate the help. That is owned by the same developer on the east side, correct? That parcel?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So that would probably be developed eventually in the same fashion?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm not sure that that's exactly a difference between the east and the west, but I understand timing.
Yeah.
All right,
It's
thank
a
you.
lot to do with timing.
Thank you. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Brooks.
Yep, thank you, Madam Chair. Scott, just a couple of questions, or actually, we don't have anybody from CPD here. What's this? Oh, we do? Oh, hey,
Chris
Mr. Gleisner, look
Gleisner.
at you. Got a haircut,
Do you
nice
want
fade.
do you want him to come up to the table?
Yeah, can you come to the table? What is the, what's the zoning here? For this? We did get a haircut. Wow. Yeah, no, it looks good.
Whole new look.
Chris Gleisner, Development Services. The zoning for the sites both east and west of the street are EMS 2, so a Main Street two-story zone district.
Okay,
That
great.
does allow for mixed uses, residential components, open space, quite a variety of different uses that you could put in
But
there.
they're gonna come back around and rezone this to OS2?
I would assume for the parks component, we would be looking at an OSA rezoning down the
OSA,
road.
got it, okay. Just a couple questions to get caught up here. Thank you for that. It wasn't a large part, but I'm sure there'll be more questions. Gilmore, we've done in District 9 a ton of parks, and I've rarely had any community member say there wasn't an inclusive process. In this context, we're saying that it was not an inclusive process. And so help me understand what went wrong, what's going on, and you said there will be an inclusive process of design afterwards, but tell me what that will look like as specific as you
So
can.
I would have to take some responsibility for some of those issues. As someone that was trying to make a park happen in a community that desperately needed it, I was moving forward and trying to acquire the land and working. The developer came and talked to me, and I saw this as an opportunity to really create something in that community. I was going to the neighborhood meetings with him. He presented this whole concept of the redevelopment, including the park, back in January of 2017. there was some, there were some concerns about different things, naming, some other things, but we didn't get a lot of the real pushback until later in 2017. We really tried to engage the community, was going to the meetings. Then that's when, the community decided to, Chris had a community meeting in October, and we got a lot of people giving input. So we decided to started to have some meetings about the concept design, and then also the community had some meetings with the concept design. Those are concepts. So at this point, we don't have an official design for this park. So when this passes, if this passes, we will actually really engage with the community and really try to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. We will reach out to all the R&O groups, we'll reach out to community groups, we'll reach out to the schools, because this park is not for, it'll be for us, but really it's for the future. It's for the kids too. And so we want to make sure that we create a space that all people at least feel that something that they want got into this space. We've got to remember that this is 1/3 of an acre. This is not, like saying we're going to go out and redesign City Park or something like that. This is 1/3 of an acre, a very small parcel. So there is going to be some major limitations on what can go in and what can't go in. I was actually just speaking to someone just a little while ago, and because of the size of this parcel, you got to realize there's going to be limitations on what can happen in the park too. There's going to be a playground in the park. We know that. We want to have a playground in the park. So because of park rules and regulations, think about this. Because of where the street is, where the playground will be, this park will basically be alcohol free. I don't think a lot of people realize that. So there's things that, as a parks department, we look at, and we're starting to realize that this space is going to be great for the community, but there also will be some limitations.
So so I appreciate you being honest about that piece, and I'm sure there'll be more clarifying questions, but, regardless of the size, Pocket Park is important to the community,
Yes.
and being inclusive from the beginning is extremely important. And so let me just ask you this. I don't know if I've ever heard of a process without a competitive bid. And so help me understand that piece. Maybe, and that's, you and Lisa can tag team that, but,
Development agreement?
I mean, even,
At the time that we were doing this, it wasn't like I was going to put out a competitive bid to everybody and say, hey, do you want to give us money to build this park? The developer came to us. He owned the block. He came and said he wanted to incorporate a park into his development. So there was no competitive. There was nobody to reach out to put a competitive bid out to. This was someone that approached us and said, we want to do this.
And I will say, if I can jump in, we have only on a couple of times done exchanges, and they're under unique circumstances with a very specific owner. So I think that is why it would not normally go out as a full bid or proposal from that standpoint, because it would only work, that exchange component only works for a very specific location.
but it's not a policy, because we've done before. We've put a RF.
That's why I'm saying it's very limited.
Yeah, we put an RFI out and let people come to us with their ideas of how they can be creative and whatnot.
I would say, though, I was going to, like I said, we went to the public, we went to the community meeting back in January. It was presented to the Greater Park Hill Board, and then we presented it to the meeting, the overall meeting, back in January. The beer garden, because the proposal from the beer garden was brought up. The beer garden was there because they were actually talking about the challenges of getting the zoning for the beer garden and getting it going. Some of the pushback on the beer garden from the community. At that time, if the beer garden would have approached us right at that time when we were already having those discussions and saying, hey, we want to, possibly do this and what can we do, that might have been a different discussion. But that, you had almost a 9-10 month period between those two times where we were in discussions with the developer on how we can move this parcel forward and this park forward.
Okay. My last piece is I'm here on this block once a week to get a haircut at House of Hair. Shout out. And obviously this issue comes up in barbershop talk. And one of the biggest issues is the belief that this development, along with this park, is not going to be inclusive, right? And we've heard that, and so I know this is a big issue for you. You and I talk about this in 5 Points all the time, but what I don't hear is what efforts will be made, whether it's the developer, the city, us doing a park. All of our parks are supposed to be inclusive, to make sure that it is an inclusive piece.
You know, I think something that we've really done a good job as a Parks Department recently, over the past, say, 10 years, is actually when we look at parks now, we actually really look at the community that we're building them in, and we try to design those to the community. Historical community, present community, we try to incorporate those things. The parks down in 5 Points, we incorporate music. The park, Paco Sanchez, we're incorporating, Paco, the music there, the radio station. We're trying to incorporate in all of our parks. We're building parks with wagons kids can play on because they were part of a trail system. So when we start really finalizing and starting this design, we will look at all those items that really makes this community special and makes it different. And then we need to incorporate those things into the park and really make sure that we honor the African-American history of this community, the things that the African-American community has brought to this community. I grew up not far from this block, and so I think this is something that we have to work really hard on as a planning team. We have to get out there and really work hard to engage those citizens that sometimes are so busy, just making it every day in life, that they don't have time to come to those public meetings. They don't have time to engage. We need to reach out and make sure that we're engaging with those community members and getting their input however we can do it, and making sure that they know this park is for them. This park is for all of the community, and everybody is welcome.
And I would just add that we've reached out to the neighborhood and asked them if they would want to join the design selection team and be part of the process in selecting a designer, and then be part of the process of actually being in charge of the design with us at the table. So we don't typically do that for small neighborhood parks, but we're happy to do that in this instance.
Yeah, I got a couple more questions. I'm going to yield to other
Okay,
folks.
thank you. Councilman New.
On the design question too, is this park, is it classified as a pocket park? You started off talking about pocket parks. So is that
Yes.
what
Yes,
this what
it would
is,
be.
a third of an
Councilman,
acre?
would you speak more directly into your?
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So this is classified as a pocket park, sort of that size. The only thing I'd like to suggest is to consider if there's somebody from LA that is an expert in pocket parks, then you may want to bring somebody in from the outside to help with this design process, to make something really special and has that experience in pocket parks. So it's just an idea. Also, I've heard a lot of discussion about a concern about if there's retail along the park, part of this development, that it'll spill over into the park. And I just need to make sure that we understand that that's not going to happen. This is going to be a designated park, and there will be no spillover of retail into this park. There'll be a clear line of differentiation.
Yes, that is correct. There will be no spillover into the park. The park will be the park, and you'll have patios, possible patios at the restaurants, and that's where the restaurants will be.
And we did just rebuild Quick Park in the 5 Points neighborhood. That's a similar size park. It's 0.4 acres, slightly larger. Worked with the neighborhood. The neighborhood's very happy with the outcome. I think the councilman's very happy with the outcome. It's a great transformation of that small pocket park in 5 Points, and I expect some more success here.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Kashmann.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Scott, how far back are you aware of the historic use of this plot? Have you looked past its current usage?
The Excel parcel?
The parcel that will become the park.
I don't know the exact historic piece to that exact parcel. I know there was a church on that block. I know there was some restaurants. There was some, I think, 3 homes. There was a mixed use of things on that block.
Okay. I guess you answered this. You're guessing that the $650,000 may cover your costs, may not. Can you, Gordon, I know you were directly involved, how big was the playground that was built over at Ash Grove? Do you know, I'm trying to get an idea on, you know, I know, obviously, we've got about 16,000 square
Yeah.
feet for this parcel.
I can't give you a size just from memory, but it's a neighborhood scale playground. What we would do here would probably be something on that size or slightly smaller to be able to fit into a pocket park size.
Okay. Do you know how large the park that's being developed at Wash Park is?
The playground?
Yeah, I'm sorry, the playground at Wash
Oh,
Park
you
on
know,
the diagonal?
It's probably as large as this whole parcel.
Okay,
I walked it yesterday, and it's pretty spread out and pretty large.
okay. And as Councilman New was asking, so this will be park alley to street. The development will be on either side, won't border the alley side of the park in any way,
Yes.
okay? That's all I've got. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman.
Can I ask him to repeat that? The alley, repeat that?
In other words, the parcel runs from the alley to the street, and the park will occupy that.
To the alley.
Right,
Yes,
will
okay.
occupy the entire thing. I was concerned that maybe the development would border, right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Espinosa.
Could you go to slide 3? And then do you know how many units are in the proposed development that surrounds the park?
This one?
Yep.
I don't.
What was the question?
How many units in the proposed development that surrounds the park? Great.
Yeah.
Sure. Fire away.
You have to kind of stand underneath one of these microphones, or right there. Okay.
Hi, Ben Maxwell with HM Capital Group. So on the north side, the first floor is retail, the second floor is 21 micro apartments. On the south side, the first floor is retail restaurant, second floor is 10,000 feet of office space. And then on the farthest south end of the block, there'll be 21 townhomes.
So 42 doors plus retail and office.
Correct.
Okay, so I do like the fact that it's mixed use, because that was my biggest concern, is this sole embedded business district might actually go 100% residential, which wouldn't help this neighborhood sort of long term. But $15,000 per door, not including all that commercial and retail space, is actually a pretty good deal for the developer, if you ask me. Especially considering that, yeah, he could build zero lot line on either side, but he couldn't do that by facing an open space. You know, that would have to be solid wall, or he'd have to pull his development back a few feet in order to maintain the separation. So again, I've always challenged or questioned how we ended up with this number, because it seems very, very favorable to the developer. Yes, we're getting $650,000, but you know, there has to be other concessions, and maybe you have them, because that's my next series of questions is, you know, what is the role that developer is going to have in the design of the park?
He has not asked for any special role at all. I'm assuming he'll come to the meetings and participate along with everyone else in the neighborhood, but there is no special role.
Have you negotiated? So what worries me about is the timing, right? Is if he's supposed to hit the ground here and be out by next fall, you know, and you're still in the design process. You don't know if you're going to put a fountain, what sort of below grade work you're going to do. If there's some spoils that you could use from his development to help, you know, contour the site. Who's going to do the right of way improvements? Or, you know, if he's going to drive over your curbside and tear it up, I mean, is the plan to just restore it to the existing condition, or to build it to consistent with the entire development? You know.
And Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe as part of our SDP plan, we have to replace the entire alley from 28th to 29th, as well as sidewalks.
Entire front. So do we, but so.
Regardless, outside of that
So,
$650,000 donation.
So it really bothers me, what really bothers me is if we look at these two green squares, they're identical. Size, shape, almost location. Orientation is the only thing that's different. Why haven't we spent 3 years designing this thing? I mean, the city doesn't have $100,000 to do the design. And that concept could have just been mirrored. Why weren't we having, if we have hundreds of input already, and you said it yourself, we have, we know what the neighborhood wants from all that input. Why didn't we do design and then adapt it appropriately?
Design without construction. Did you want to?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Councilman Happy Haines, Executive Director of the Denver
Because
Parks
and Happy, just so you know, because you've sat in this seat before, it is very difficult for me to have my meetings in my community sort of be met with this issue time and time again, which is very much outside of my district. And I see here and I go, this is actually, to me, a fairly straightforward, simple, sort of good idea and good opportunity and something that could be leveraged, but it seems to be so woefully handled.
So,
We're having trouble hearing back here, so can you pull yourself up closer to the microphone, Happy? Oh, I'm so sorry to ask you. It looks like that's a pain in the
Yep,
neck
thank you.
or in the shoulder. Yeah, okay, thank you very much.
thank you,
Appreciate it.
and thank you for the question, and I agree with you. This is a situation that, for which this solution was supposed to be very simple and has become very complicated unnecessarily, in my view. And so, by way of responding to your question, let me go back to the beginning. And we purchased this site from Excel in order to provide a pocket park in a neighborhood that is lacking park space. We had no money at the time. I mean, that was a transaction that was done, and we're lucky to have the money that we had to make that purchase at the time that the parcel was available. We had no money to either design or construct this park, and it would be simply in our inventory for a number of years until it got onto our law. As all of you are well aware, we have a CIP list that extends for many years and still has lots of projects on it over the years that haven't been funded. So this would not have been a near-term project. We would not have put the dollars in immediately to design or construct this park. It would simply be in our inventory for future development. So when the developer approached and said, hey, I have an idea because I'm going to be developing, and I'm recognizing that this park is of value not only to the community but clearly to whatever I would be developing, I'd be interested in contributing. And that's when we started the conversation about the developer contributing to making this park happen sooner than it would under ordinary circumstances. And so when confusion arose in the community, and I will just say I think that has more to do with the community's anxiety about the development than it had to do with the park, but I understand it. And then confusion about whether this was going to be the developer's park and not the public park. So we took the process sort of under our own wing. The developer had prepared some ideas, some concepts, and because he was wanting to contribute. We decided to sort of take control of that process, to back up, and I think I said this in a number of community meetings a number of times. We're going to go backwards, roll back, and start where we would ordinarily with any parcel for development. We will start the community process to determine what the community needs are, and we did that primarily to assure the community that this, in fact, was a public park. It didn't belong to the developer. It was not a private park, that it was ours, and that it would be designed and built to meet the community's needs. So we engaged in a series of meetings well in advance of when we ordinarily would, because we really didn't have the design money for that park at that time. We had to draw resources from other things in our department, but we felt it was important to provide that assurance to the community. No, this is a community park. It is a public park. It'll be owned and operated and designed and constructed by the city. That still is the case as we speak. And so, I think I think the comment was made earlier about the lack of community engagement. I have to tell you, I've never seen a pocket park with so much community engagement as we have had, even before we've begun the actual design process. And this was, again, as I stated, to make sure that the community's understanding was clear that this, in fact, is a public park and will be built to meet the needs of the community.
I do understand all that. Where I'm coming from, though, is to Chris's point, the zoning on one side of Fairfax is identical to the zoning on the other. So the way you could address the park from a building form now and in the future would be identical. And so, the physical context is not changing other than the mirroring of the location realistically. So you could actually, if we just looked at that and said, here's a situation where, developers coming forward this opportunity, it's something we don't want to miss out on, but the community is legitimately concerned about what that impact is what is the motivation for a developer to make such a deal. There obviously must be some motivation. It's not pure altruism that I want a park relocated, into the interior of my development. And for the city to basically go, well, this council, I think, would robustly, we put a park funding ballot measure out there, for crying out loud. If you had come to us and said, hey, at the end of last year, we want $100,000 to forward some design so that we can start talking about either of these two locations in that context, I think.
I have to say honestly, pardon me for interrupting, but we would not have come to you with that request. This is a gift that somebody is coming to us, other people using other people's money to build something that ordinarily we would have to spend public dollars. We would not have come to you ahead of all the other projects that we have in our queue, in our CIP, and asked you for this. We're pursuing this opportunity because this is somebody else's money to accelerate a public project.
But in the presentation today, with all due respect, they talked about the possibility of needing to advance additional funds if, in fact, the $550,000 was insufficient to cover the design. So if we have $200,000 on the back end, we should probably have $100,000 on the front end.
We're not talking about this year's dollars.
No,
That's
but by
the point I'm
2021.
making. Yes, we might. And we might come back with a request in another year or two for additional dollars to finish it if the dollars are not sufficient to develop it. That would not be unlike we would do with any other project.
Yeah, I'm just saying that use council and the desire to leverage these opportunities to help generate win-win and avoid the level of conflict that has arisen in this area. Because I think I've always seen this, and I told Scott when I first heard about this is a great opportunity. But somehow it ended up spiraling in a way that I don't like.
I wish there was a way to avoid that. I don't think there was, Councilman. For community members who were against this particular development and this particular developer being involved in any way in this public park, the only way would be for us to just turn our backs on the dollars and say, we will proceed as we were planning to do originally and build the park when we get the funds on the west side. That is clearly still an option if this council chooses not to go forward with this land transaction. We will continue as we committed, and I said to the community, we're committed to this park one way or the other. It's either sooner or later. It's sooner with somebody else's money or later with ours. Mm-hmm. And that really is, that's the simple equation here. And I understand the concerns. That's one of the reasons why we took over the process, to try to assure folks that this is not the developer's park, personal property. This is a public park, and it will be designed and developed to meet the community's needs. But if it is the will of this council or the conclusion that that is not going to serve the community's needs, we will absolutely go back to our original plan. And it is not. This isn't about, punishment or anything else. We will go back to our original plan, which is develop it as soon as we are able, given the financial resources.
Don't say that, you're scaring your developer. Thanks.
Well, he
you.
knows, he's known from the beginning that my view on that.
Okay. Thank you, Councilwoman Black.
Thank you. I just really have a comment. Game plan just came out, and I think a shared value we all have is that every resident should be within a 10-minute walk to a park. And we have a lot of needs in our city for parks, and realistically, they're going to be few and far between. Land costs so much now. And with the population growth of our city, they are even more in demand. So I really appreciate all of your efforts. So thank you, Denver Parks and Rec. Thank you, developer. Thank you for coming with $650,000. I mean, we all have to fight for every dollar in their district, particularly me and Kevin Flynn. And
Just to be saying.
so I appreciate it. So I just wanted to say thank you. I did also visit the pocket parks in Los Angeles, and they are very small. This is very small. This is a lot of neighborhoods in my district have a single house on a piece of property that size. This will be a small park. No one's going to be playing soccer there. Also, in my district, I've had Happy and Scott and the mayor out. I have a neighborhood that is in desperate need of a pocket park. I've been talking about it since I was first elected in 2015. There's no money to buy it. There's no money to develop it. TPL's been out. There's a great need, and we're losing parcels every single day. Developers are buying up, putting in high-density housing. I haven't yet to have a developer who was willing to work with us and donate land. So please come to District 4. And furthermore, my last comment is Southmore Park is a very nice big park that is on Hampton, and it has some not very nice mixed-use office buildings, I guess, along Hampton. And it would be a great place to have a pocket park. This is the way people want to live now. They want to live in cities. They want to engage with their park. They're not just quiet places for contemplation. They want to be active in their parks. And so having a beer garden next to a park, I actually think is awesome. And we would love to have that along Southmore Park, but unfortunately we're getting a freestanding emergency room, which I'm really unhappy about. So thank you for letting me say my piece.
Just to be saying.
And again, thank you. I think it will be great for everyone in the neighborhood. All the people who have lived there for a long time, as well as the new people.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Appreciate it. Councilman Flynn, back up again.
Thank you. I wanted to get a clarification, Scott, when you said that this would be alcohol-free park. Is that
Per our rules and regulations.
okay? Does that take into account the upcoming alcohol?
No, it has nothing to do with that. What I was saying is there's rules that we have on the books that actually impact parks. We have some parks down in Councilman Brooks' district where we have a playground. You cannot have alcohol within 50 feet of the playground, and then you cannot have alcohol within 50 feet of the street. And so because this is such a small parcel, that actually makes this parcel, you won't be able to take alcohol.
Yeah.
Okay, so the new proposed policy has no impact here.
No, the new proposal will apply to this park. What Scott is saying is because of the size of it, the rules will make it very, there might be like a square inch on it that actually isn't covered by the rules that prohibit alcohol within certain proximity to other facilities.
Yes, like Sunny Lawson Park has like a 5 square foot area right in the middle of the park where you technically can have alcohol. I'm not joking, but so there could be, like I told you though, about permitting, we would have to determine what the permitting of this space would be. That could allow for some use in that way.
Right, okay. And is there an open space requirement in this zone district?
There's no open space requirement in the
None
zone
at all.
district.
Okay. And Gordon, you talked a lot about this when Councilman Brooks was asking questions, but I want to understand, maybe to walk through what the department intends to implement as a public process. I want to understand that up front so that the folks from the community here also understand up front what will their level of involvement be. And I understand that people have already been highly involved in it, but how will it be structured?
Sure, and I'd say our normal process would be one thing, but we actually want to do more than our normal process,
Okay.
given the Pocket Park's size and scale of this project. We do want the members of the community to be involved in the leadership of the design effort. We want them to be involved in the selection of the design team. We want them to be a part of all design meetings that they want to be a part of.
Okay. But what does that look like? Does that mean that every committee, a subcommittee, one committee,
Sure.
are we committing to have a majority of the members be from the R&O or from the neighborhood or from 200 feet away? Do we know what that'll look like?
I don't think we've determined it to that level of detail,
That's what I was
Councilman.
wondering.
And I think, as Gordon indicated, our normal process is during a design process. Usually, we hire the design firm ourselves, and often it's somebody who we already have on contract as an on-call. In this instance, Gordon has made the commitment to have the neighborhood involved in selecting the design consultant, so that there's some comfort in that design consultant meeting the needs of the neighborhood. Okay. We haven't gotten down to what design committee might look like. There's often a design committee, but that is usually composed of people in the neighborhood. It would include someone from the R&O for certain, and other people who live in the immediate vicinity.
Okay, so that's a commitment you're making here.
Absolutely.
That we don't typically do. Okay, that's. And Madam Chair, I don't know if you're going to take comments.
We do this all together
at
in
the same time.
on this committee.
One thing that in following this for so many months now, one thing still bothers me, and that is on the west side, that the developer owns the parcel to the south where the CrossFit Center is, and there's a beer garden, a commercial enterprise on the north side already. The developer in this case could build whatever he is building on the east side, could build that where that CrossFit studio is also. So the west side park could be positioned almost exactly the same as the east side park. I mean,
Yes.
they would look.
I think that is what
I'm having trouble understanding.
It's a question of timing.
I don't understand. I understand that, but I don't understand what the. Madam Chair, I don't know if you would allow this, but could I ask someone from, maybe Nancy Francis or somebody to explain what the concern is about the accessibility of the park on the east side versus the west? Because I'm having trouble seeing what the difference is. I see the park being the same, whether it's on the. In fact, it troubles me even more that the owner.
You're allowed to invite anybody you want to.
Okay, thank you. It troubles me even more that the owner of the beer garden literally wanted to make that a private park owned by him when he wrote in November. And so, I mean, when you talk about not being welcome in a park, the owner of the beer garden wanted to make that a private park. So Nancy or Maria, somebody willing to.
And whoever wants to will just stand under this microphone so the television can pick up your response.
I think that's mischaracterizing what the offer was from the owners of the property that operate the brewery. Their desire was to, if need be, they'd buy it. In other words, hey, if you're selling it, we'd buy it. Mm-hmm. But they would rather, and they've said this, and I think they said it to you when we visited with them, they would rather see it be a park. So if the city's selling, we'd like to get involved in the real estate process like any other bidder. But if you're not, we'd like to contribute to ensuring that there's a park there, because for them, they'd rather see a park there. Does that answer your question?
No, because the second part of it is, why does the community feel that if the park were on the west side, it would be more inviting than if it were on the east side, given that the CrossFit parcel would eventually be developed similarly to the east side, and you would have the beer garden on the other side, similar to a restaurant on the east side. I'm having trouble seeing the difference.
The way this was presented in September to the Greater Park Hill community, and then at the subsequent meeting that the councilman sponsored, the developer talked about, I have a design, I might tweak it. It's the presentation that we were given in September, now the story's changed substantially, which I'm grateful for, was that it would be developed and built by the developer in context, which would have addressed Councilman Espinosa's concerns about, coordinating the construction, so I can see why that would have been efficient. But that was the concern, that then, well, you're basically handing it over to this gentleman to determine what it would look like, and it would be in keeping with the more upscale and dense development over on that side. So, hey, wait a minute, let's stop and let the community be engaged in what happens. And by the way, all this question about money, one of the things that the community said in September was, we'll get involved. We'll get involved. We'll look for funding. I mean, Parks and Rec has gotten a GOCO grant and already started building the Westwood Park. They're working in Montebello with TPL and in Cole. So, the community was very willing to engage in raising funds and anything else it would take. And I think that we proved our commitment was real by immediately initiating a series of design meetings and a community process. We had volunteers, architects, who stepped forward and put together a design. And I spoke about a week ago with the architect who produced that drawing, and he was very frustrated because when the city hired their vendor in the beginning of the year to replicate the process, he sat down with that gentleman and went through all of the components of the document that we put together and the elements of the design. And the guy said to him, oh, this looks really good. I'll use this. And it completely disappeared. Okay. So our concern is now we know we're going to lose. We know you guys are going to approve this. So our R&O chair suggested, and I want to give credit to various council members who've given us a lot of input and suggestions and ideas for how to do this. Well, if we're going to lose, then let's get something back for the community in this deal. Whether it be some affordable housing units, some assurances that the leaseholders will enter into good neighbor agreements, a number of things like that. What do we need to do? And I want to give Espinosa here, Mr. Raphael Espinosa, a lot of credit because he's kind of said to us, why don't you try to make this work? And we're willing to do that, but I think, I can see that I don't have any friends at the other end of the table. But, I don't know if that answers your question.
Can I suggest to you, Nancy, that you don't have to be friends to be able to negotiate and work things out. We do that all the time, even on this council.
But you have to talk to people. You have to talk to people in order to do that. And I'm very skeptical that those conversations will happen. Never at a table have we sat at a table with these folks and had a conversation. And even at those meetings, they had their vendor and their facilitator run the meetings. They didn't stay for the difficult conversation twice. And I'm happy to hear, Councilman Brooks, that you frequent the barbershop, so you know people on the block. We had real tough meetings. We had one in October, and we had our white residents talk about blight, literally say blight to the members of the community, and talk about all these things, and it was tough. And there was another conversation that actually was sponsored by the Parks Department, but unfortunately their folks didn't stay for it, and that one was tough too. And some people heard things they didn't like. Yeah. So
basically the community is of the opinion that the park on the west side would be more accessible and inviting than on the east side.
I think that at this point the community is distrustful and angry about the entire program. And so, at that offer I mentioned in the letter, last ditch offer to say, well, then let's work together. Yeah. Let's bring something out of this, and it was rebuffed. So vote how you will. Thank you for.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilman Brooks. Yes, Councilman Brooks.
Yep. So appreciate all the conversation. This is I can tell the intent, and this is what I wanted to get to is the intent was right, but being a council person for 7 years, I've had great intention that has fallen really hard just because of implementation. And so here's what I want to say to the developer, and formerly representing this area 3 years ago, is that the development in this area it's a new day, and there has to be social involvement and inclusion, and I guess what I would really like to see in this is to see you come and figure out how we can do it. It could be a beautiful story, We just did this on the Robertson. The developer there came down to and did inclusion of ownership with the community, and we're about to, it came together beautifully. And so whether that is affordable housing, whether that is local businesses, which I know a lot in the community that have been pushed out because of prices, would love to talk with Councilman Herndon and you about how to make that inclusion happen for the community, because for me to support this, that's what I need to see. And I think I've heard that may be in the works. But the other piece is sitting in that barbershop every day, the biggest fear that everybody has is that there's nothing there, right? It was a site that was not developed, so it wouldn't be displacement, but it would be exclusion from folks who had lived in the community for 20 to 30 years. And so that's what I would need. And I don't know if you want to respond.
Yes, I mean, it's, thank you for the opportunity to speak. It's always been our intention to make this development completely inclusive. I used to live in that neighborhood from 2004 to 2008. I understand the dynamics of that neighborhood very well. It was never our intent to make this a decisive issue. Literally, we met with city. We knew there was going to be a park, or there was a slated to be a park. We said, hey, great, there's a park. We can build something next to it. Met with council, and I met with Parks Department. Both said there's no money for the park. I told my partner that. He said, well, I'll put up the money. Let's just build the park. It'll be cool. And I know that's a hard thing to believe that it actually was an altruistic endeavor, and it is. We're building retail in a time when retail is very hard to build, as you've seen on Tennyson Street, Mr. Espinosa. And the reason we feel comfortable doing that is because we're building the park, and we feel like it'll bring tenants. It'll bring a much better neighborhood feel over there than if we just built residential on that block. As far as inclusivity, I think we want all members of the community there. We want small businesses. We've turned away some franchise tenants that want to move in there. We really are looking for the small business owners. We've talked to Councilman Herndon about people that have been displaced, other businesses that have been displaced. We are looking to fill this with people from the Park Hill neighborhood, people from the neighborhood surrounding it. So that's always been our intent.
Yeah, workforce housing, affordable housing, is there?
We looked at workforce housing and affordable housing on all the units. We paid the affordable housing fees instead, but our micro units are well within the affordable housing range, just at market rate. And then we will probably have a couple of the townhome units that'll fall in that 80 to 90% of median income range over there as well.
Are you finished? Yeah. Okay, thank you, Councilman. Councilman Herndon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're 2 minutes out. I want to appreciate and thank all the comments from the council members. I appreciate the community continuing their steadfastness about this, and I am comfortable moving this to the full body. The concern we hear is this going to be a public park? And I believe that Parks and Rec has ensured us that is going to happen, to make sure that the community members have a seat at the table so that they will ensure that this park will be something of the community. And I will also offer as well, we have time. So let's partner as neighbors and figure out what can we do. Is it a ribbon cutting? Is it a party that we're going to do so that the community knows once this park is built, should this go through, that this is for everybody. It's not something that's just going to be part of the development. So we have time to figure that out, and I think we have a commitment from Parks and Rec. That's certainly something I am committed to, and I hope that Greater Park Hill would want to be a part of that as well, because I've talked to several community members outside of Greater Park Hill that are extremely excited about this, about the redevelopment of this area. So I would encourage my colleagues to support this to the full body, and I'm ready to make the motion when you're asking, Madam Chair.
Well, Well, you are the last one up for speaking, so if you'd like to make the motion.
So moved.
Is there a second? We have a second. Are there any objections to moving this forward to council?
Make a comment?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just so you know, because it was acknowledged that I did have conversations with the community. It was hard on them as well, because I've always seen this as a potential win-win, and was frustrated with them for not sort of realizing that as well. So I do think that Parks is going to give has made commitments here on tape that council will hold to their feet to the fire in the future, and the community will as well. I would, and I do appreciate your acknowledgement of how difficult, it has been for me to see what happened on Tennyson. To that end, if you, to the degree you can codify a commitment to GNAs on your ground floor retail, at least those adjacent to the park, and to the community, don't get crazy with your demands, be reasonable. I think that too would give some sense of assurances. It will limit noise possibly, or hours of operations, the number of special events, things like that, so that it doesn't start to feel like it becomes something else, because special events are being held by multiple things every weekend of the summer, adjacent but not in, and so that's I just wanted to make sure that people knew that I was hard on both sides in this situation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Brooks?
Yeah, I'm going to support this conditionally. I would love to have a longer conversation about some of those units and other resources to really look to putting those units down at a lower and deeper affordability workforce.
Okay, we have it moved and seconded. Are there any objections to moving this forward to council? And seeing none, we'll see you at council. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it. And it is 12.